Believe it or not, Iran once stood for political muscle and high culture. In antiquity, it was the empire of the Achaemenids, who left us the grand ruins of Persepolis. Later came Sasanian Iran, famed for its heavy cavalry, armored juggernauts so formidable that even Roman legions trembled at their sight. Medieval Iran equals elegant miniatures and sublime poetry, and the Iran of the 1970s. Why, that was the era of pop singer Gugush, the golden voice of a generation. Well, that all is in the past now. Today's Iran invokes this. And also this. Modern Iran is one of the most isolated countries on the planet. Economically, it lives under a dense web of sanctions, literally a financial siege. And on the inside stands the rigid regime of the Ayatollahs, Islamic fundamentalists who built a state where theology supersedes common sense. In 2025, Iran barely left the headlines. First came the killing of a young woman, Mahsa Amini, for refusing to wear a veil, igniting mass unrest. Then an exchange of missile strikes with Israel, then American long-range bombers targeting facilities linked to Iran's nuclear program. Finally, another wave of protests, apparently sparked by sharp gasoline price hikes, ended in bloodshed, with hundreds, perhaps thousands, of demonstrators killed. One might ask, how does a country with such a formidable past, a unique cultural tradition, and some of the largest gas reserves on Earth has come to this? But on the channel, How the World Works, we ask a less intuitive question. Why did Iran's 20th century decline take so long? Because if you examine the historical record, it becomes clear as day. Iran was always destined to fail. And here is why. Let's rewind about 2.5 millennia. The 6th century BCE. Enter Cyrus the Great. Legend says he was the grandson of a Median king who received the sort of prophecy rulers hate. The boy would overthrow him and rule half the world. The king ordered the infant exposed in the mountains, gift-wrapped for wild animals. Instead, a shepherd spared him. Grown up, Cyrus led the Persians, then a subordinate tribe, into revolt against the Medes. The rebellion worked. Conquerors and conquered fused into a single people. Next came Lydia, in what is now modern Turkey, ruled by the famously wealthy Croesus. In fact, it was him who decided to preemptively strike the nascent Persian Empire. Before attacking, Croesus consulted an oracle. Should he cross the river Halys? The answer was, cross it, and you will destroy a great kingdom. Okie dokie, said Croesus, and marched ahead. However, an oracle neglected to mention whose kingdom exactly will be ruined. Turned out, it was Lydia, not Persia. The lesson here is, always get second opinion, I guess. In 539 BCE, Cyrus turned to Babylon. The Bible recounts how King Belshazzar, mid-banquet, saw a fiery hand writing on the wall, Mene, Mene, Tekel, Upharsin, which means, your kingdom has been weighed and divided. Not long after, Cyrus's troops were marching through Babylon's gates. And with that, something new appeared on the political map. Not just a bigger kingdom, but the first true empire in human history. No, not the first Persian Empire, the first empire, period. You see, Cyrus conquered, but not the way his predecessors did. And he had plenty of predecessors. Bronze Age Mesopotamia reads like a long list of different nomad tribes invading the sedentary societies. And here is that list. Around the 20th century, BCE, came the Amorites. In the 16th, the Kassites. A century later, the Indo-Aryan Mitanni. In the 11th, the Aramaeans. Wave after wave rolled in from the periphery toward the irrigated heartland between the Tigris and Euphrates. The nomads had mobility, toughness, and a professional familiarity with violence. The settled states had bureaucracy and wheat. Guess which better translates into success at war? Unsurprisingly, the cities never managed to keep the steppe out for long. And this wasn't just a Mesopotamian quirk, by the way. At the other end of Eurasia, China faced the same recurring nightmare. First the Xiongnu, then the Mongols, later the Manchus. Different names, same story. A guy on a horseback always has the upper hand, both literally and figuratively. The Persians, emerging from the Iranian plateau, fit the type. True, Central Persia had fertile valleys good for farming, but their core way of life, was mountain pastoralism. In winter, they moved up to highland pastures. In summer, they descended into the valleys. Not quite nomads, not quite farmers. A semi-nomadic society that nevertheless breeds excellent riders. Strong, mobile, comfortable in the saddle and in a fight. So when they descended on Mesopotamia, resistance was brief. Ironically, these invasions almost always end the same way. A relatively small band of nomads storms in, takes power, and then, slowly, gets absorbed. The ruling elite adopts local dress, local laid-back way of life, local table manners. 2 or 3 generations later, yesterday's terrifying horsemen are arguing about irrigation taxes and temple repairs. In other words, the land wins in the end. The nomads don't so much rule sedentary civilizations as they dissolve into them. Their empires are swallowed by the very societies they conquered. That's the Early's model. And now for the second model, Iron Age Assyria. In the first millennium BCE, the Assyrian kings have literally invented a new imperial formula, a state built on radical violence. They did not blend into conquered societies, they dismantled them. Entire populations were deported, marching under guard to alien regions. Communities were shredded, local elites uprooted, people disoriented. Such measures would make resistance virtually impossible. And little resistance that emerged was answered with theater-grade brutality, mass impalements. Captives with pierced jaws chained together and paraded toward rebellious cities as a living preview of consequences. One famous relief shows the Assyrian king reclining in a garden, calmly admiring the severed head of a defiant prince, which obviously for him was just another Tuesday. There was only one problem with such system. People usually don't like to be impaled and have their jaws pierced, so the subjugated peoples bitterly hated the Assyrians. And any external conqueror was seen as a liberator. It was precisely such a conqueror that the Neo-Babylonian kingdom became when it crushed Assyria at the end of the 7th century BCE. Babylon in turn fell to Cyrus, and Cyrus introduced a third imperial model, revolutionary and far more durable. The formula was submission in exchange for stability. The Persians did not slaughter en masse or shuffle entire populations. Conquered peoples were allowed to live like they always had, pray to whom they always had, run their cities the way they always had. Yes, they were taxed, but not bled dry. And imperial membership came with perks. Royal roads stitched together the far ends of Asia Minor, and trade flowed more easily. The real innovation, though, was structural. Cyrus built a system that preserved the Persian core. The conquerors did not flood into the wealthy cities and vanish into local luxury. They stayed rooted in their homeland and funneled resources back to it. With imperial revenues, they raised monumental palaces at Persepolis, Ecbatana, and Susa. The old formula of nomadic conquerors was, "You have a cool way of life, we want to join you." The new Persian formula was, "We have a cool way of life, we'll take your stuff and make it even cooler." So the Persians did not dissolve into their empire, they stood above it, a self-conscious military aristocracy, proud, cohesive, and very aware that their status rested on conquest. This arrangement held for 2 centuries. At its height, the empire stretched from the Greek cities of Asia Minor to what is now Afghanistan. Impressive. But one glance at the map reveals the system's strategic weak point. You see it by now, right? Here's the paradox. The empire's weakness was its security. For almost 2 centuries, Achaemenid Persia faced remarkably little external pressure. To the east, the steppe posed no existential threat. It was simply less densely populated at the time. From the north, the Scythians were buffered by the Caucasus Mountains. Also, Persian cavalry handled their raids well enough. To the south stretched the Arabian Desert. Egypt was already conquered, and beyond it lay more desert and the Nile cataracts, which left the west, Greece. And yes, Marathon, the 300, we've all seen the movie. But from the Persian perspective, those defeats were peripheral flare-ups. Sure, they were embarrassing, but were they strategic disasters? Hardly. No one in Persepolis seriously imagined that the Greeks would one day go on the offensive. And so the empire has laid back and put its feet up. Sounds nice. But remember that social systems, like organisms, evolve under pressure. Remove the pressure and evolution stalls. The Achaemenid environment was almost suspiciously friendly. As a result, the imperial model froze in place. The Persians themselves were a minority ruling a vast, diverse population. The army's backbone was aristocratic cavalry and elite guard units, the famous immortals. When needed, contingents from subject peoples were added. The outcome was a mosaic army, many ethnic groups, uneven coordination, and unsolid loyalty. Meanwhile, at the far edge of the known world, something previously unseen was taking shape. New disciplined force like a steel fist, preparing to test the soft underbelly of the Persian state. The Greeks, time and time again, demonstrated their military superiority. By the way, the 300 is relevant here too. They had two advantages. First, a new tactical solution, the phalanx, a dense wall of shields and spear points, a real walking fortress. Cavalry charges bounced off it. There was simply no good counter to Greek phalanx at the moment, but the phalanx required something deeper, a massive state. In the Greek polis, citizens were soldiers. War was not the privilege of an aristocratic minority. It was a duty of every single citizen. Persia, by contrast, still relied on its noble core. Philip of Macedon, father of Alexander, perfected the system. He introduced large-scale conscriptions. Macedonian peasants were drafted, drilled regularly, paid, and equipped by the state. War became institutional. Philip built a society of massive military participation. So when this new army, large, disciplined, professionally trained, fell upon Persia, the Achaemenids had no answer. Given decades, perhaps they would have adapted. Societies can transform. But history did not grant them decades. In 334 BCE, Alexander crossed into Asia. In 331, he shattered Darius III at Gaugamela, in what is now Iraq. A year later, he entered Persepolis. The steel fist had landed. So Persia, sitting at the very center of the Asian world, fell into a trap of success. Ringed by natural defenses, it has relaxed. No pressure, no adaptation. A strategic advantage has covertly grown into a strategic weakness. The first such example today, not the last. After Alexander's death, civil war between his generals immediately took off. You know how it goes. When the big papa is out, little ones start messing around. So the empire got divided. Persia landed inside the Seleucid realm. However, new masters saw it as a peripheral area. The Seleucids were busy wrestling with Egypt and overlooked an important development in the east. By the late 3rd century BCE, tribes from the Caspian steppes, later called the Parthians, moved into Iran. A new state took shape. The ruling class was steppe aristocracy, cavalrymen who kept their nomadic edge, and they brought a tactical surprise. Against the tight geometry of the Greek phalanx, and later the Roman legion, the Parthians fielded heavy cavalry, cataphracts, also known as clibanarii. The latter name comes from the Latin for oven. You understand why, right? Think an old beater with a broken air conditioner in taxes in summer. Well, that is what an armored rider felt like under Iranian sun. But when those riders hit, they hit hard. Example, catastrophic disaster at Carrhae, 53 BCE. Marcus Licinius Crassus, Caesar's rival and Rome's richest man, was killed. Legend says molten gold was poured into his dead mouth as commentary on his greed. For the next 4 centuries, Parthia remained a recurring headache for Rome. Yet cavalry was only one pillar of their strength. The second was economic. Upon Parthia suddenly fell a real golden rain. Well, more precisely, a rain of silk. It all began with horses. Horses that the Chinese army did not have. And yes, we're in China now, try to keep up. Chinese mounts were small, quick to tire, and on the open steppe, they were no match for the Xiongnu cavalry. In the late 2nd century BCE, Emperor Wu of Han dispatched a man named Zhang Qian westward to scout allies against the Xiongnu. The trip lasted 13 years. Long story short, when Zhang finally returned, he brought news of wealthy cities in the Fergana Valley, modern Uzbekistan, and of horses that sounded more mythological than biological. They didn't run, he said. They seemed to glide. They sweat blood. They were not so much horsed, but rather dragons, really. Emperor Wu's reaction was immediate. We've got to get in on this equestrian action. In 101 BCE, a massive expedition marched west. It reached Fergana, secured the prized horses, and, more importantly, opened a corridor into Central Asia. That corridor became what is known as the Great Silk Road. From China, it skirted Tibet, crossed the fertile Fergana Valley, and then passed straight through Parthia. For the Parthian rulers, this was like a conveyor belt of wealth. Silk flowed west, silver flowed east, and Parthia stood in the middle, collecting its share. It was a cheat code for unlimited gold. By the way, we don't have our own Silk Road, so we have to do the only thing we're actually good at: offer you high-quality content about how the world really works, and hope for your appreciation. And if we're delivering on our side, we have a small request. We're considering creating deeper, more substantial content on politics, history, and economics. Content that helps you understand how the world works, and we want to understand in order to predict, and predict in order to act, because we don't like being puppets. This premium content will appear on Patreon. We're still working out the details, so for now, we've created an empty page with free membership. Would you consider subscribing? Just to signal interest. Once everything is ready, we'll present you with a clear value proposition, and you can decide for yourself whether it's worth your attention. No pressure. If that sounds fair, the Patreon link is in the description, and thank you in advance. Back to our prosperous Parthians. For them, this new deal came with some fine print on it. Look at the map. Iran is the cultural core. Sanctuaries, highland palaces, the aristocracy's ancestral seats. And that center effectively splits the state in two. To the east lies Fergana, strung with wealthy Silk Road cities, the cash register of the empire. These routes had to be guarded, especially against nomads drifting in from the Great Eastern Steppe. To the west stretched the fertile valleys of Mesopotamia, dense population, rich soil, grain, taxes, recruits, the demographic and agricultural engine of the state. For these lands, Parthia would wrestle Rome for centuries. Geography, in other words, was not neutral. It tugged the empire apart. Wealth in the east, breadbasket in the west, sacred heartland in between. The Parthians were condemned to strategic shuttle runs, east, west, east again, forever managing two fronts. That was problem number one. The second problem was different social structure. Parthia, and from the 3rd century onward, its successor, the Sasanian Persian dynasty, remained aristocratic societies. At the top stood mounted nobles, armored elites who could smash Roman legions and look good doing it. As a military adaptation, it worked. As a social model, it had limits. You see, when Rome absorbed provinces, it offered incentives. Yesterday's provincial could become a Roman citizen, enter administration, climb the ladder. Persia offered no such opportunity. An Armenian or an Egyptian simply could not become a Persian aristocrat. Also, Rome exported culture along with power. For a city, becoming part of the empire meant a number of cool perks. You get things like baths, triumphal arches, amphitheaters, aqueducts. Also, those gladiator games sound like fun. Persia exported little beyond tax collectors. Look at Sasanian silver plates, again and again, aristocratic hunting scenes. Culture and wealth were reserved for nobles only. As a result, Rome proved more cohesive, and hence, more durable.